Well, in 2012, Daniel Day-Lewis won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of President Abraham Lincoln. And the seriousness with which he took that role is legendary. He isolated himself for months, read thousands of pages of firsthand accounts of the president in order to embody his every mannerism, from his voice, a gentle tenor, reedy and slightly cracked, to his shuffling, flat-footed walk. And then he didn't break those patterns for months during the filming of it. And so his peers marveled at the meticulous preparation, unwavering commitment to the role that he took on. And his performance, if you've never seen it, of that role is a gift to all those who see it. Now, a few years before, Brendan Fraser, the actor from such hits as Encino Man and The Mummy, also portrayed Abraham Lincoln in the 2000 romantic comedy Bedazzled. Critics were less complimentary of the film, describing it as, quote, weak, pitiful, and persistently unfunny. And while Brendan Fraser, no doubt, is an actor who possesses great talent, critics agree that he was not as convincing in his performance as Abraham Lincoln, largely due to the fact that he didn't embrace the role with the same seriousness as Daniel Day-Lewis and was therefore less transporting in his presentation of the 16th president of the United States. Now, why tell you any of that? Because one of the ways to measure how you're doing in life, how am I doing under God in the world, is to examine how seriously we've taken and performed the roles God has given us to occupy. That none of us are entirely encompassed by one single role, but all of us are given a myriad of roles that we fill in. You are child, you are employee, you are the steward of certain resources. All of us have these different roles that we embody. And one of the ways to evaluate yourself in life, how am I doing, is to pull out the different roles that have been entrusted to you and say, how am I doing at this? Am I excelling at what this role requires? And what I want to do today is just stop and evaluate our role as a member of a family. That though we're all from different backgrounds, doing different things, wired differently, all of us have been placed by God within a particular role as a member of a particular family. So the question today is just, how are you doing in that role? Now, because it's Father's Day, a natural assumption would be, okay, he's about to pivot to focus on parenting. And that would be a legitimate way to go. There is a percentage of parents in here. However, an even larger percentage in here are children. I would dare say 100% of us came from somebody. So I want to focus on your family of origin, because here's the reality that some people, however far away you've moved from your family to get here, you have all been profoundly affected by your family. I mean, I was looking through family pictures a couple years ago and flipping through them, and I remember I pulled up one, looked like me in my 20s, and I was like, I don't remember this moment. When was I standing by a horse? And then it hit me, I was like, wait, that's my father! And I realized I look exactly like my dad. And for better or for worse, I am much more like him than sometimes I've cared to admit. And it's the same with you. Your family's influence stays with you. And for better or for worse, you've been impacted by these people. Just think about your life. Many of your profoundest joys and many of your deepest pains are tethered to your family. Comedian George Burns said it once. He said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. And some of you feel that. All right? Some of you, you're in counseling, and it's not because you have an annoying neighbor. It's because you're trying to understand and unwind some of the complexities inside of you stemming from your relationship with your family. We're bound to these people, even if you don't want to admit it. And yet all of us need to evaluate, if that's a place God's put me, how do I deal with it? Because here's the reality. You are forever bound to that family. And here's where the scriptures will push even further. Not only do they influence you, the ongoing quality of your relationship with God and your success and failure as a human being is inextricably linked to how you treat your family. 1 Peter 3, Paul says of husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way so that your prayers may not be hindered. He tells men, if you're not understanding towards your wife, I don't want to hear from you. That's what God says. And some of us hear that and you go, well, that makes sense. Husband and wife, they made this commitment to this mutual covenant, right? But Paul was talking to young Timothy as he was leading the church in Ephesus and had to give him a ruling on how to handle widows and how the church offers financial support. And he told him in 1 Timothy 5, he says, if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. Catch that. Paul defines caring for your aging parents as godliness and pleasing to the Lord. And then he goes further in verse 8 and he says, and if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially the members of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I don't even fully know what that means, but it sounds bad. But what Paul is saying there, though, is there's such a strong connection in the Bible between your faith in God and your treatment of your family that if you do this poorly, it causes this into question. So this is important, that if the grace of Jesus Christ has flooded my heart, it should influence how I treat people, and it should flow into my household, right? And let me just stop here and say, for some of you, this is an easy sermon. You grew up in a great family and you had great parents and you're sitting here going, you know what, this is so great. I've been looking for new creative ways to honor my parents. This is gonna be so good. And you know what, congratulations, good for you. It's gonna be good for you. Others of us, you don't feel that way. And even when I brought up family, you're like, yeah, there's a good question. Why did God stick me with these people? I would not have chosen to hang out with them. Given the freedom to choose who to hang out with, I hang out with people who are nothing like them, and yet every holiday, here I am again. Why would he do it? Well, let me say, number one, is that God is sovereign over your family. It was his idea. We saw that in the prayer in Ephesians 3. Paul says, for this reason, I bow before the Father, he's talking about God, from whom every family on earth is named. Naming there carries the idea of source. I made you, I get to name you. And he says, the Father in heaven created every family. Families were God's creation. They were his idea. And they had a design in view. His design was to create family for cultivation. It was an organizational method. If you look back in Genesis, individuals are meant to be grouped in families. It's a pretty brilliant design. God made sex fun, and he made it the way to create people. And as two people knit together and create life, now you've got this adult male and female teaching these young children what it is to be like as a man or a woman, how you're meant to function in society in a cocoon of safety where they're meant to encourage you. That was God's idea. Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply. He tells them, hey, I've given you this gift of sex that creates humanity. Now fill the earth with these people and you're gonna be contained in these little safe areas where you can cultivate. That's what family was meant to do. That's what he told him in Genesis chapter 2. God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate. What does cultivate mean? It means to arrange resources in such a way that life can flourish. When you cultivate a garden, you're positioning dirt and sticks and things. Why? So that what's alive in that garden can flourish and thrive. And that's what parents were meant to do. They were meant to create an environment with your money, time, resources in which those children can be fruitful and multiply, can grow and flourish to be all you're meant to be as a woman or man under God. This was God's design, and it's beautiful and it makes sense. And it's not this way at all for many people. Because early in Genesis, sin came in and distorted the family. God made it for cultivation. What it became was chaos. That you see in the first married couple, you see selfishness, you see passivity, you see a fracture in their relationship. And after humanity rebelled from God, God said, your break from me is not just breaking your fundamental relationship with God, it's breaking all your human relationships. And he looked at them and he said to the woman, your desire will be for your husband, he will rule over you. There's going to be tension now in this marriage bond for the rest of humanity. And not only will there be tension between the sexes in this marriage as they get their children, all this resentment and anger is now in the hearts of their children. Think about that. The Bible tells us about the first 4 human beings on the planet, that Adam and Eve have these 2 boys, and one of them lets resentment and anger poison his heart, and he murders his brother. Like if you came to me and said, yeah, my parents had 2 kids and one of us murdered the other, that would be one of the worst stories I've ever heard. This is the first family. I want you to catch that, because here's the reality. For many of us, when I start talking about the brokenness in your family, it feels like an isolating thing. When you think about your family's dysfunction, you feel like it pushes you away from the rest of society. But let me tell you something. Our family tree was broke from the jump. It started with brothers murdering each other. That's terrible. So your dysfunction in your family does not isolate you from us. It's actually the thing that knits you together with us, because not everyone gets happiness, everyone gets pain. And so the brokenness in your family makes you one of us. We all know what it's like to be a part of a crazy family, because we all came from the same one. And the chaos you experience in a very real and particular way in your family, it's just the churn from the chaos that began at the tidewaters of our faith back here at Adam and Eve. So what does God do? You just ditch the whole plan? Well, family was a great concept, but never mind, we'll do something else. No, God designed family, sin distorted family, and then God decided to display his grace through a family. He picks a guy, Abram. And you see the book of Genesis narrows in on one family, and he says, I'm gonna bless you, and I'm gonna bless your seed. And then he says in Genesis, and through your seed, I will bring a blessing to every family on the planet. That's how he words it. God says, I'm gonna start a work of grace in this one family, and that grace will crash onto the shores of every single family. And for some of you, your whole family lives on the shores of grace. They have put their faith in Jesus as the sacrifice we needed delivered from God, and your whole family knows what it is to be loved and cherished by God. For some of you, you're the first one, and praise God, and let's keep praying for the others. But sin runs through our whole family tree, and God in his mercy put grace into that tree. There's a different stream now flowing that can bring life, right? And so now we gotta figure out, how do we respond now, given that he's put us in these families? Well, let me give you 2 perspectives, and then we'll get into practice of what we're supposed to do. Perspective number 1 is that God is sovereign over your family. God designed it. And so I mentioned that from the prayer in Ephesians 3, from whom every family on earth is named. That doesn't just mean the institution of family was God's idea, it means your particular family was God's idea, right? That your mom's college roommate induced her to your dad at a bar, but it's not because of him. God was weaving the picture together. Does that excuse everything that your parents have done wrong in this world? No, but it does tell you that God weaves together the world, right? And as it's telling us that, here's what's interesting. It says that God is sovereign over all things, but do you remember the bulk of the prayer? I'm not gonna teach every bit of it. The bulk of it was, this Father from whom every family's unnamed, he controls everything. He says, I'm praying to that guy, that from the riches of his glory, he would grant you to be strengthened with power. He's like, I'm asking God to give you the strength to do what? So that Christ would dwell in your hearts through faith, that you would know Jesus, the Son of God that was sent for you, and then you would be so rooted and grounded in God's love that you would have the strength to even comprehend. God's asking for you to get the strength to even comprehend what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. He says, I want you to be so rooted in the love of God, seeing it manifest through the Son of God, that it courses through you and explodes out, that you could just even understand the littlest bit of how massively loved you are by the sovereign God. He said, that's my prayer, is you would know that the God who rules everything loves you. And if your earthly father failed, your heavenly one never does. And he loves you, and he rules all things. And when you get that idea that I have a powerful, loving, heavenly Father, there's 2 perspectives that shift. One, it liberates you from sin-justifying mentality of victimhood. It liberates you from the sin-justifying mentality of victimhood, and it generates compassion for those who failed in their roles. Those are the 2 things it does. Greatest example of this is Joseph in the Old Testament. Some of you are familiar with Joseph, came out of Abraham's family tree. Joseph was particularly loved by his dad, not a particularly healthy way to balance the lives of your 11 children, but as he was the youngest and doted on by his dad, his older brothers hated him. He was kind of arrogant. And so one day, Dad sent him out to check on his brothers, and what did they do? They took him and they threw this little beloved son in a pit. And then Genesis 23 says they threw him in a pit that was empty with no water in it, and then they sat down to eat. That's what it says. And as they sat and ate, they were discussing, do we just murder him here? Well, yeah, if we do, we can put some goat's blood on his shirt and say, man, he was eaten up by wild beasts. And they're kind of discussing whether or not to murder him while this terrified kid is in a well. Can you imagine? They're having a casual business lunch deciding if we're gonna kill you or not. And finally, they see a caravan go by, and one of them's like, no, let's just sell him, man. So they sell him into slavery into Egypt. He arrives in Egypt as a slave. While he's a slave, he's successful in that, then wrongfully accused of a crime, and then put in prison. His life's going the wrong direction. And while in prison, he tells some of the other prisoners, he said, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here I've done nothing that they should put me into this pit. So in Genesis 40, he's pretty upset. And yet by the miraculous power of God and his ability to interpret dreams, suddenly fast forward, he's been in front of the Pharaoh himself, interpreting his dreams. Pharaoh's like, I need a guy like this in my circle. So he goes from the prison to the right hand of Pharaoh. As a famine hits the land, Joseph is now put in charge of all of Egypt. This man has enormous influence as second in command in Egypt, and as such, he gets married. Now he's successful, his life turned around, you're a winner. He starts having kids, and in Genesis 41, it says, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. You think he still had family issues, even as a success? He named his firstborn, I have forgotten my hardship and my family. He named his child, forget you, family. And you're like, wait a minute, isn't the fact that that's his name mean you're gonna remember them like all the, okay, you know what? He's on a journey and he's processing, but that's what he named the boy. Can you be in your 40s and have residual parenting issues? You better believe it. And yet as his story continues to play out and he sees God using him and he sees this famine destroying much of the land, and suddenly he sees his brothers arrive at his doorstep who are starving to death, it dawns on him, wait, what they did was evil, but now I'm second in command of the most powerful nation in the region, and the dreams God gave me means I have food. I can keep alive a nation and my family. And so in Genesis 45, when he looks at his brothers and tells them who he is, he says, don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. He's honest, you made mistakes. He says, but don't be distressed about it, for God sent me before you to preserve your life. Listen to what he's doing to his story. Not like my brothers sold me and he sees above his brothers. He says, what you did was wrong, but God controls my story, not you. And God sent me here. And God sent me here with a purpose, to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house and ruler over the land of Egypt. Do you see what's happening to Joseph? He was really victimized. He was really hurt. And yet as he sees a sovereign God who loves me over his story, that allows him to completely reframe himself. No, God has a purpose for my life. I'm here to preserve life. I'm here to be a blessing to the world. And there's enough grace in me to even bless those who had hurt me in the past. That's the power of this perspective of understanding. If my earthly family failed me, my heavenly Father does not. And I got a Father who's strong and loving, and whatever your evil plans are, you don't beat him, he wins. Right? And when you understand you got a God like that, it liberates you to reframe your family. Some of us, some family members who hurt you are just so big in your eyes, but when you have a God that's bigger, it lets you shrink down that person and see them for what they are. No, you're a human being made in the image of God, so there's dignity to you. And you're a sinner. And so when you filled that role of dad, when you filled that role of mom, when you filled that role of brother, you failed, because everybody does. And God's response to sinners is to call sin, sin. He doesn't hide it, he exposes it. But he has a reservoir of grace sufficient enough to wash away every stain. And when I'm tethered to a God like that, I find the resources to love people who hurt me, even family members, right? That's powerful. That will set you free. And some of you need that today. I got a bigger story, and I'm liberated to love. I remember for me, when God really got a hold of my heart in my 20s, sitting with my dad, and it was like our world shifted. I had so much anger over some failures of my father's in his life. And I remember it was in my 20s as God was working on my heart, we had a conversation. It was the first time I saw Bobby, not just dad. I saw him, and I said, that man filled this huge role, and he failed at some key parts of it. But I can still have love for him, because God loved me, and the love of God is so inexhaustible and inexpressible, it overflows the banks of my heart and can even flow towards this man. God's powerful enough to do that, to change your perspective, if you'll let him. And that's why I read this prayer before we got into the children obey your parents part, because Paul says that. You need to know the love of God, and the rest of Ephesians is the word walk 5 times. So once you know what God's done in you, now you can walk in a way that pleases God. The grace has to land in you first, and then you change your life, all right? Or else I'm just up here giving you a self-help talk, and that's not what this is. This is God changes your heart, and then you change the way you live. The resources of a heavenly Father allows you to love your broken earthly family. Do you see that? And let me just say a side note too, where your biological family may have failed you, your spiritual family steps in. For many people, they're like, well, I didn't get mentored, I didn't get taught, I didn't get educated. Behold your mothers and your brothers and your sisters and your fathers. That's what Jesus said when he looked around. Who's my family? He said the people who do the will of God. And where your family has fallen short, God in his mercy has knit together a spiritual family where we're meant to love each other. Now, will we fail you? Count on it. We're sinners. But sinners being changed by the grace of God. And we can all stumble forward together, right? So let's talk about how to do that, shall we? Let me talk to children and then talk to parents, and then we'll get out of here. Sound good? This is great. We're doing great on time. I thought we'd be here through lunch. All right, verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord. So now that the grace of God is working in me, it changes the way I live, and it flows all the way down into the house. And he says, as it flows into your house, if you're a child, obey your parents. Now let me say, children there is more about relationship than age. Some people are like, isn't that just for little kids? It can actually count for adult children too. He's talking to all of us. And the word obey doesn't have a lot of wiggle room in it. It means do what they say. But then you got that phrase, in the Lord, and some of them go, well, that puts limits on their authority. So you obey your parents, but if they tell you to sell crack, you say, I'm sorry, God doesn't want me to. And so that's kind of a governor on your parents' crazy. And that's true. However, it's meant to strengthen the command, not weaken it. It's meant to say you obey your parents as a function of walking with the Lord. If you love the Lord, he built this system called family. We broke it, but he hasn't abandoned it. He said, so I want you to enter it and not give up on it, and I want you to enter into it in a way that obeys. Now, does this dynamic change when you get married? A man leaves his father and mother, cleaves his wife. Yeah, there is some change, and yet he roots this in an Old Testament text. Verse 2, he says, honor your father and mother. That's from the 10 Commandments. This is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and you may live long in the land. That word honor there is you put a high value on that role. And so you honor the person who filled it. And it's a directive from God, and then he attaches a promise to it. If you do that, if you honor this role and the people who fill it, you will live long in the land. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean, so if you talk mean to your mom, God's gonna strike you with lightning. I know many of you probably thought the verse said that, like, ooh, be careful. No, that's not what it's talking about. God in the Old Testament was building a society, and as he's giving them structure in the Old Testament, the foundational building block was this family unit. And he says, this is the basic building block of this society. I want you to honor these roles and the challenges and obligations that come with them, because that will give stability to the culture. You won't flourish if you don't honor these roles, right? And so he's talking to them structurally, and here's the reality, it's still true today. When these structures are honored and kept intact, we do well. When they're not, individuals suffer. And society, if families lose, society loses. We know that. I mean, the US Department of Health and Human Services shows that the poverty rate among children in single parent homes is at 47%. That's 4 times the amount of any single parent or home with 2 parents in the home. 4x more poverty in a single parent home. We don't dwell long in the land if we don't fight to preserve the honor of this. Now, I know when I say that, some people feel shame, and I'm not trying to shame anybody today. But the reality is we have to realize these structures make sense, and every report you read regularly comes out with a staggering correlation between family breakdown and the increase in drug use, suicide rates, lower educational achievement, high school dropout rates, early sexual debuts. There's all kinds of sadness and brokenness that comes out of the breaking down of the family. Now let me just say, if your family's broken, that doesn't mean you're doomed. The grace of God is too powerful for that. And so many of us driving this thing came from families that broke in really tragic ways. But the grace of God is too good. It's too good. And yet we can say that and own that and still say, but this structure is good and should be fought for. So how do we do it? Well, there's two words given to children there: honor and obey your parents. Obey and honor. And let me give 4 things for you to do that fill those, and then we'll talk to parents for a minute, all right? Children can cultivate a culture of honor in your family. The word obey in Greek is a combination of the words listen and under. I'm listening and I'm under. So how can I cultivate a culture of honor within my family? Number 1 is, I would say, listen attentively. When your parents speak, listen attentively. Listen to what they're saying. If you're FaceTiming with your mom tonight and you find yourself saying, I know, I'm an adult. That says more about your impatience than it does about her nagging. And you can push them away with statements like that. Or you can press in with a question. How did it work out for you when you were my age? Tell me what it was like to be 20 in your day, Mom. Right? Press in with a question, come as a learner. My dad passed away the year that we launched this church. I knew far more theologically than he did. Interesting to think he knows far more than me now. But I knew far more than him. Not even close. I paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time in seminary to know all kinds of things about God my dad didn't know. But after he died, I remember I had his journals, and I read through his journals, and the simple faith of my struggling, recovering alcoholic dad, his journals included these prayers for his children on a regular basis by name. And I was so challenged by that. I wasn't doing that with my kids. But here, this regular discipline of bringing us before the Lord in this beautiful, humble way challenge me. I have things to learn, not just about hunting and fishing and all this stuff my dad taught me. I have things to learn about God from my dad if I have ears to hear them. So let me listen attentively, come as a learner. And then number 2 is act responsively. Act responsibly. Be inclined in your heart to do what they say. A resistant heart comes from pride and arrogance, and you don't want to be that kind of person. But Jesus Christ, remember when his earthly ministry was launching, his mother came up to him, they were at a wedding, she was like, Jesus, they're out of wine, it's a problem. And do you remember Jesus' response to her? Woman, I got this whole Messiah plan mapped out, and being the sommelier at this wedding is not part of it, Mom. Like, this is not the situation, right? But she doesn't even wait for to respond to what he says. She turns to the servers and says, do whatever he asks, right? And Jesus doesn't go, come on, Mom, I'm trying to be Messiah, I got a plan, I'm an adult. He doesn't do that. He looks around, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, looks around, and his mom wants him to fix the wine problem. And he's like, all right, you guys get some jars, slip over there, get some water, go there. Hey, boys, let's go, all right? And he bails, and it's the best wine they ever had. Even though it was inconvenient, he found a way to bless his mom. Do you see it? You can find a way. You can find a way. It's interesting, I did college ministry for years, and I'd have students come to college, come to Christ, God would get a hold of their life, and they would come up to me in distress. They're like, Ben, God changed my life. And so I went home for the holidays, and I told my parents that they were sinners, that needed to confess and repent, and they're resistant to the gospel. What verses should I memorize? How can I help them? And I tell them, stop. I said, advice upward is very hard to do. Your whole tactic is off. I said, stop. I said, next time you go home, do the dishes. Without being asked, just after dinner, do them. And take out the trash. I promise you, you just start doing things like that, and your atheist, resistant parents will say, truly there is a God in College Station, Texas, because what has happened to you? They will take God seriously when they see a change in your life, particularly expressed in how you treat them. So listen attentively and then act responsively. Be inclined to do what they say. And honor, that word honor means to ascribe worth or value to somebody. You honor the position, and so you honor the person. How do you do that? Let me give you two things for that. Number one is you speak graciously. He says that in this passage. We didn't read it either, but he says, speak to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. You have power over your words. Speak words that are life-giving and redemptive. So speak graciously to them. What does that mean? When I read my dad's journals, there was a season where he was really struggling with the demons in his life, and I really had this burgeoning, growing faith in my 20s, and I was judgmental and dismissive of my dad. And I found those pages, and it never crossed my mind at that point, because dad was so big, it never crossed my mind that my words could impact him emotionally. And it broke my heart to read those pages to see where I hurt him. That doesn't mean all the brokenness in our life was my fault. It just means that there was a role I had to play with my words. And as the person who had received the grace of Jesus, I wish in hindsight in that season I had been more gracious with my words. So speak graciously, even if it's hard. That's why the inexhaustible power of God is available for us. Sometimes you need it. And some of you may say, well, Ben, they don't deserve it. Of course they don't. Nobody does. But the grace of God is a free gift, and it's been given to you. And so if they failed you as a parent, say, so as a kid, I owe them nothing, that's fine. But as a recipient of the loving grace of God, God now turns and says, and I want you to take that grace and pour it out on them. That's the command from God. So as a child of God, we take this up. I'm gonna speak lovingly. Jesus, when he launched his earthly ministry, do you remember the Gospel of Mark tells us he was preaching, so many people had packed into the house, was breaking out the doors, and his family showed up, his mom and his brothers, and it says they showed up to take custody of him, for they were saying he is out of his mind. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, bros. I'm here trying to kick off the redemption of humanity, and they're in the back like, sorry, when his blood sugar gets low, he thinks he's a deity. Jesus, Jesus. And they're like, dude, your mom's outside. And he's like, all right. It's challenging. His brothers mocked him later. They made fun of him. And yet as Jesus was hanging on the cross, dying for our sins, we have a few statements he said. He prayed for God to forgive the people who were mocking him. He said, I'm thirsty. He entrusted his spirit to God. And then he looked at one of his disciples and said, hey, will you take care of my mom? That while he's dying for the sins of humanity, he finds a way to care for his mother, even in that moment, right? So call your mom, right? That's the point there, right? You've got the time. Call your father, even if that's hard to do, right? Jesus, I love the way 1 Corinthians says it. When he was resurrected from the grave, he appeared to his disciples, then he appeared to 500, and it says, and then he appeared to James, his brother, who'd made fun of him. Jesus makes a special visit. He's not just kickstarting the whole church. He goes to the brother that had given him a hard time and was like, not the Messiah, huh? Not dead, bro, right? And yet, when we get the book of James in our Bible, it's not a guy that was beaten down by the failure of not recognizing the Messiah in his home. You see a David standing, or James with a head up, shoulders back. Why? Because the grace of God is too good to leave a brother like that unforgiven. So Jesus' love is redemptive, and ours can be too. So we speak graciously, and we speak gratefully. When you honor someone at a banquet, you say nice things about them. And so if you want to honor your parents, speak gratefully to them. Thank them for things. My grandfather was not a particularly kind man. But I remember once I was showing him how Google Maps works, and I was showing him how you can sort of drop the perspective and sort of see the world from different angles, 3D, and he starts telling, go to 36, he starts saying numbers. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he was giving me latitude and longitude. I'm like, man, that's not really how this works. That's not how I work. And so he starts telling me places to go, and I start going there, and there are airstrips that are not labeled on Google Maps because he flew bombers in World War II. And they're still there, and you can go there. And then as I'm dropping the perspective, he's showing me how you had to round this mountain and come down hard to get into he's talking me through some of the flight paths he went on as a young man. And I remember sitting there next to this guy and just thinking about all the lost potential in his relationships. But I thought, but we can honor this. And the whole family gathered around to watch him do this because he didn't really ever talk about the war. And just to watch this and go, but we can honor this. We can honor you did something scary and brave as a young man. That's something. Steve Jobs sought out his biological mother, and an interviewer asked him, why did you do that? And he said, I just wanted to thank her for having me. He said, I know that she was young and distressed and scared and didn't have to make that choice, and I'm glad she did. And I just wanted to tell her thank you. The word parent derives from the words to come into existence. And some of you go, man, my parents failed at every level. But if you came into existence, you can thank them for that. US government estimated a few years ago that to raise a child from a baby to high school costs parents roughly $250,000. So to get you up to age 18, that's pre-college, is $250,000. So for some of you, if you can't think of anything else, just call your parents and thank them for the $250,000 they spent to get you to this point, right? Parents, don't bring it up, you'll ruin the moment. But kids, that's something you can offer. All right, let's move to parents real fast. Parents, verse 4, it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. It's interesting because there's a word and in Greek. I don't know why we cut it out in English. It ties it together. Children do this and fathers that. This is meant to work together. It's hard when it doesn't. Children are meant to come other, fathers who are meant to really be serious about following the Lord. And when that and breaks down, this whole thing gets complicated. So I'm moving over a lot of the complications you experience, and yet I'm giving you the ideal that we've all fallen short of. And yet here it is, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Now let me say this, some might go, well, hey, why not moms? What's the deal? Well, moms were mentioned in the honor part, right? Honor your parents. So mom gets the honor, but then when he starts getting in their grill, he goes to dads, because dads had a propensity in those days to retreat from child rearing. I know that's hard to imagine, just take it by faith. Centuries ago, that was an issue. And yet you look at today, and does anyone say, well, you know, the problem in our country today is these too many present fathers in the child rearing process. That's the problem. Too many dads who feel responsible for their children. That is not our nation's problem. And so here the Bible presses in on dads for their unique role. And he says, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger. How do you do that? How do you provoke a child? Let me give you two ways. Number one is you're overbearing. And number two is you're disappearing. Overbearing. A father can have unreasonably harsh demands, arbitrariness, constant nagging, pressure to achieve, constant nitpicking of their decisions, impatience with their process of development, trying to control what they major in, what they do for a living. And if you're over-controlling, they can never win. And Colossians says that the kid will get discouraged. Time magazine published a study on from the Journal of Child and Family Studies, published by a professor of psychology, Holly Schriffen at the University of Mary Washington. And she said, every person has three basic needs in order to be happy. They must feel autonomous, competent, and connected to other people. She said, helicopter parenting decreases adult children's feelings of autonomy, their belief in their competence, and their connection to others. And it increases feelings of depression and dissatisfaction. She took the long way to express what Paul does in Ephesians and Colossians. Don't provoke them, they'll get discouraged. As a child gets older, our role as parents becomes less command and more counsel. And when I did college ministry, the greatest strain I saw in young people was a parent that was still trying to be a decider rather than an advisor. The book of Proverbs, you have a father talking to a son about business ethics, financial stewardship, controlling his sexual impulses, and there's no demands and commands in it. He's counseling him. Son, you don't want to do this with your money. Son, I'd be careful hanging out in these kind of environments. Son, you got to watch out with this, with your desires sexually. He's counseling him. The book of Proverbs was written to 13 to 15-year-old boys. That in the Hebrew culture at that age, the dad is already shifting more to advisor and coach, not decider in his life. And we're meant to be the same way, moving towards an advisor role. Also, not disappearing. That's equally painful. If a parent's overbearing, a kid can never feel like they win. If a parent's gone, they never hear the answer to the question, did I win, Dad? And so disappearing can be incredibly painful. McGill University in Canada published their findings of growing up without fathers. It says it alters the structure of the brain and produces children who are more aggressive, angry, and have a higher risk of developing deviant behavior. Now again, you're not doomed if you grew up in a fatherless home, but there's a reality we have to deal with. There's that old African proverb, if we don't initiate the boys, they'll burn the village down. And I read Mike Tyson's biography. I am not recommending it to you. It is very dark what this man got into. But when he says, here's all the broken, sad things in my life, he points it at the disappearance of his father early in his life. Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, did the same thing. It's a painful thing. And so for me, I know with my kids, I'm not leaving them. But I also know with my kids, I want them to have a dad who's present in their life. And for me, just a little free piece of advice here is I try when I get home, I know I got 2, maybe 3 hours with them before they go to bed. And I know the way our memories work. Our memories work in flashes, little pictures you remember. And I don't want their flash and picture of their dad is him always doing this. Of I choose anything on here over you. It's not what you mean, but it's what it can say. And I want my children to watch their father choose them over the world. And so the phone goes away and I'm theirs and part of their life. They need to see that. I want to give them that. I want to be present in their lives. So last 2 points, y'all are doing great, is advising. He says, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That bring them up means help them rise to the level of peer. So that means there's an advising role. He used the word trained there, that I'm teaching you things, that I'm teaching you things you didn't know. I'm giving you information. It's not just discipline of stop that. I'm giving you things you didn't know. I'm bringing you up. And a lot of times that comes through shared experience. Here's where I did that right, son. Here's where I failed. Here, son. And I would encourage you not to do that. And the last one is encouraging, that I speak courage into their hearts. I don't discourage them. I encourage them. That's how Colossians speaks of it. I had a friend, Jeff Johnson, he said it, he quoted it online, be the person you needed when you were younger. I was like, a math tutor? I don't think the world needs me to do that. I had to think about it, understand what he's saying. Some of us felt like, man, we really missed out on that comforting, nurturing sort of presence in our life, but that doesn't mean you're doomed to not extend it to others. Jesus looked and he said, man, a prophet's without honor in his hometown. He got no respect in Nazareth. Sometimes the people who know you the longest have the hardest time watching you grow. And yet Jesus could still lay down his life for every Nazarene. And we can love and serve and offer grace to everybody. So let me just close with that. The grace of God is available for you now. Jesus said it. Today is the day of salvation. Don't miss it. The grace of God is here for you to wash away every stain, to begin to heal every wound. That's why God, the Father, gave the Son. And then as the grace of God fills your life, you can offer it to others. And let me just encourage you to not wait. There was a moment as my dad's health was failing, he was making decisions I didn't like, and I just got mad. And I was at his house and I walked out into the driveway and I told a buddy of mine, hey, we're done here. We're leaving. And as I was walking to the car, it hit me. I was like, before I leave, let me call a mentor. And I called this mentor and he was like, Ben, I know you want to leave. He said, I just want to ask you the question. He said, pause for a moment and think about your roles. Your role as a Christian. As a Christian, what will you want to have done to any other Christian and any other human in that moment? And as a son, is there anything you want to say to your dad? He said, trust me, years later, there was a lot that I had left unsaid I wish I hadn't. And when he gave me that perspective, just standing in that box, as a son, what do I want to say to my father? As a Christian, what would I say to any person? I realized, no, I do have things I want to say to my dad. And I was able to visit him in the hospital and tell him all those things. I love you, forgive you, grateful for you in these ways. So when I got the call he died, I have many friends that when they got that call, they're instantly filled with regret over the things they didn't say, the moments they didn't have. When I got the call, I kind of stopped to check. I was like, no, I got to do it. And I wouldn't have if a loving brother in Christ hadn't encouraged me to do that. So don't wait. Today's the day of salvation. It's the day of grace. And yes, you need wisdom and counsel on how to enter into some relationships. I'm blowing through a lot of them, but I'm just telling you, the grace of God is sufficient to heal your heart. It's sufficient to make you a gift to others if you'll allow it. That's the gift we have. Nobody's too far gone.